When you think about World War II, the big picture, Europe, the Pacific, but here's something maybe surprising. Did you know Brazil was actually a major player? I mean, boots on the ground, fighting in Italy against the Nazis.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those parts of the story that doesn't always get the spotlight, is it? We've got this source that really lays out Brazil's whole journey, starting neutral and then jumping right into the fight alongside the Allies.
Exactly. It's fascinating. A huge South American nation getting drawn into this massive European war.
A different angle on the conflict.
So our mission today basically is to unpack that. How did Brazil go from saying we're neutral to declaring war? And, what exactly did they do in Italy?
Right. Digging into the why and the how and their contribution to that Italian campaign should be some interesting details to uncover.
Okay, let's dive in. So 1939, the war starts. Brazil, led by President Vargas, says we're neutral. Pretty standard for the Americas then, wasn't it?
It was. But Vargas, well, he was playing a pretty interesting game from the start. He wanted to keep trading with everyone, both sides.
Ah, okay. So hedging bets, sort of.
Kind of. I mean, they had good ties with the U.S., long-standing ones. But Germany was a huge market for Brazilian exports, a really significant trading partner.
And didn't Vargas himself have some leanings? The source mentions a kind of sympathy for fascism.
It does suggest that.
Yeah.
And those economic links with Germany actually got stronger in 1940. So you've got this picture of him trying to use both the U.S. and Germany.
Play them off against each other for Brazil's benefit.
Precisely. A delicate balancing act, you could say.
Yeah.
Trying to get the best deal for Brazil by navigating between these global giants.
But that balancing act couldn't last forever, surely. Especially once the U.S. got directly involved after Pearl Harbor, December 41.
Exactly. Suddenly, Brazil trading heavily with the Axis.
Yeah.
That became a major headache for the Allies, particularly for the U.S.
I bet. You can feel the pressure starting to build just thinking about it.
The U.S. was definitely not comfortable with that situation. The source even mentions Roosevelt might have had some kind of plan involving northeastern Brazil if Vargas didn't cut ties.
Wow, really? That shows how serious it was getting.
It does. And so the breaking point, or maybe the turning point, came in early 1942. Brazil agreed. They cut relations with the Axis powers.
And what was the deal? Why did they agree then?
Well, a big factor was significant economic aid offered by the United States. That was the incentive. A really crucial moment in shifting Brazil's position.
Okay, so economics plays a big role. But it wasn't just about stopping trade, was it? Didn't they allow U.S. bases?
Yes, that was huge. Brazil let the U.S. build air bases in their northeast places like Natal, Recife, Belém.
Which are geographically really important, right? Closest point in the Americas to Africa.
Exactly. They became this vital springboard for the Allies, moving troops and supplies towards North Africa and beyond. A strategic game changer.
But, letting the U.S. build bases, that must have really provoked the Axis powers.
Oh, absolutely. It put a massive target on Brazil's back. Almost immediately, February 42, German and Italian U-boats started attacking Brazilian ships in the Atlantic.
The very first attack, wasn't that quite far away, off Egypt?
Yeah, the first one was 16 sailors killed. Just awful.
And just the start, sadly.
Just the beginning. The attacks ramped up quickly. By August 42, 17 more Brazilian ships had been hit by U-boats.
17 more? How many sunk?
15 of those 17 were sunk. Almost 600 Brazilian sailors lost their lives just in those few months.
Good grief. And the source links this directly to the U.S. bases being set up.
It makes a clear connection, yeah. The timing, the increased frequency. It seems like direct retaliation for Brazil siding with the Allies.
There must have been a tipping point.
There was. August 42 again, 2 Brazilian ships sunk in just 2 days. That just lit a fire under the public.
People must have been furious.
Absolutely. Huge protests erupted across Brazil, people hitting the streets, demonstrations. They even attacked businesses owned by Germans and Italians.
So massive internal pressure on Vargas, plus the ongoing external stuff.
He was cornered, really. So on August 22nd, 1942, Brazil formally declared war on Germany and Italy.
Okay, so they're in the war, but were they ready? Declaring war is one thing, fighting it is another?
That was the big challenge, a huge one. Brazil's army was, pretty small back then, maybe 25,000 troops, and not much real combat experience.
And their air force?
Very new. Only formed the year before in 41. And critically, they had basically no proper warplanes, zero.
Right. So how do you go from that to fighting in Europe?
Well, you need help. And the U.S. stepped up again. Early 42, they donated nearly 50 American-made warplanes. That was a massive boost for the Brazilian Air Force, the FAB.
Okay, that helps the air power situation. What about the army?
Brazil moved fast. They brought in a general mobilization law. Suddenly, the army swelled to 100,000 personnel.
Wow, that's a rapid expansion.
It is. And a big chunk of those troops, about 25,000, got trained directly by the U.S. Army, specifically for fighting in Europe.
So U.S. training, U.S. planes, any other support?
Oh yeah, money. The U.S. provided a huge line of credit, something like $350 million, just for military spending.
$350 million, that's serious money back then. What did they do with it?
Built up their own war industry, ammunition factories, arms production. They even started building some of their own warplanes eventually.
Incredible development. But meanwhile, back in the Atlantic, the U-boat threat hadn't just vanished, had it?
No, not at all. Axis subs kept attacking Brazilian shipping, even close to the Brazilian coast. It was still dangerous.
So what did they do about that?
Starting early 43, they set up joint patrols. Brazilian and American warships working together off the coast. 10 Brazilian ships, 7 U.S. ones.
Did that help?
It definitely improved things, yeah. Made shipping safer, but the losses had already been heavy. By July 43, the tally was about 25 Brazilian ships sunk. 650 sailors killed.
A steep price just defending their own waters.
And then July 43 in Operation Torch, the Allied landings in North Africa.
Right, a major turning point in the wider war. How did that affect Brazil?
Well, it led to a direct request from President Roosevelt. He asked Brazil for a really big troop commitment, 100,000 soldiers for the European theater.
100,000, that's a huge number. Did Vargas just agree?
Not immediately, no. It actually took about a year of negotiations. Our source says Vargas had his own demands, and there was also some back and forth about who would command the Brazilian troops. The U.S. wanted control initially.
Command structure issues. Always tricky. So what was the final agreement?
They compromised. Brazil would send an expeditionary force, but smaller, 25,000 strong. And crucially, it would be under Brazilian command. General Mascarenhas de Moraes.
Okay, and their mission?
To join the Allied forces fighting to liberate Italy.
So the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, the FEB, gets formed. When did they actually head out?
The first group, about 5,000 troops, set sail on July 2nd, 1944. Took them 2 weeks to cross the Atlantic. They landed in Naples on July 16th.
Must have been quite something arriving in Italy then, mid-1944.
Absolutely. Imagine stepping into that active war zone. Over the next few months, more troops arrived in stages, bringing the total FEB force up to that 25,000 mark.
Did they go straight into the fight?
Not quite immediately. They spent some time initially near Rome, then Livorno, getting prepared, acclimatized. Their first proper combat engagement was on August 25th.
And they got stuck in?
They did. They became part of the Allied push northward, fighting against the retreating Germans along the Serchio River. Then in November, they captured a town called Porto Terme, set up their HQ there.
And what was next?
A really tough objective. Monte Castello, a mountain stronghold. Heavily defended by the Germans, the source mentions something like 177,000 Nazi troops in the wider area with lots of artillery.
Wow. That sounds like a formidable task for 25,000 Brazilians.
It was incredibly difficult. The battle for Monte Castello kicked off on November 25th, 1944, and it was a real slog. Lasted 18 days.
18 days, but they took it in the end.
They did. A major victory for the FEB, but it came at a heavy cost. The source puts Brazilian losses around 420 killed or wounded.
Compared to German losses.
Much lower on the German side, actually. About 48 killed, 23 captured. Shows just how tough that defensive position was. But yeah, a Brazilian victory nonetheless. A hard one.
That's quite an achievement, especially given their starting point we discussed.
Absolutely. Real determination from a force that was, relatively new to this kind of warfare. After Monte Castello, the overall Allied advance in northern Italy slowed down a bit. Air power became more and more important.
And the Brazilian Air Force, the FAB, were they involved in that with those planes the U.S. gave them?
They certainly were. Operating from American aircraft carriers, they had about 50 planes in theater, and they were busy, flying hundreds of sorties, maybe 500 a day sometimes, bombing German positions, supporting the ground troops.
So a significant air contribution, too, from an air force that barely existed a few years earlier. Amazing.
It really is. So fast forward to 1945. The whole map of Europe is changing. France, Belgium, Greece, Albania liberated. Soviets closing in on Berlin.
How did that impact the fight in Italy?
Well, the Germans started pulling troops out of Italy to send them elsewhere. About a third of their forces left in February 45. That definitely helped the Allied push.
Made things a bit easier for the Brazilians and other Allied troops.
It certainly eased the pressure. So from March 45, the Brazilian army started advancing again, capturing more key places. Montes, Castelnuovo, Tole, Forli.
Still taking casualties, though, I imagine.
Oh yes, the fighting was still intense in places. The source gives figures for those battles. About 600 Brazilian casualties, over 3,000 American, and nearly 5,000 German losses. It wasn't over yet.
So where did they push towards next, the final German lines?
Exactly. They took Fornovo on April 23rd. Then by April 25th, a mixed force Brazilians, Americans, and Italian partisans reached Collecchio.
And what happened there?
The Allies split their forces. One group attacked Collecchio, the other went for Parma nearby. Both towns fell pretty quickly on the evening of April 26th. Surprisingly little resistance from the Germans there.
What about the other group?
They captured Forno on the 28th, and then linked back up with the main advance northward.
The Battle of Collecchio? Any specific numbers on that?
Yeah, relatively light Brazilian losses, about 45, but huge German losses, 450 killed. And get this, 15,000 taken prisoner?
15,000 prisoners, wow. The German army in Italy must have been collapsing.
It really seems like it. The bigger picture across Europe, especially the desperate fight for Berlin, meant Germany was just stripping Italy of experienced troops. It allowed the Brazilians and allies to advance much more rapidly at the very end.
So a quick succession of victories then.
Very quick. Piacenza, Cremona, Lodi, all taken on April 29th, Alessandria on the 30th, and then their final battle of the war, Susa, captured on May 2nd, 1945.
May 2nd, just days before the final German surrender in Europe. It's incredible to think of their journey from neutrality to being there at the very end in Italy.
It really is. And even after the fighting stopped, there's an interesting little postscript. When the Allies were figuring out how to occupy Germany and Austria, they actually offered Brazil a zone of occupation in Austria, a share of the responsibility.
Seriously, did Vargas accept?
No, he turned it down. He wanted the troops home. So the focus immediately shifted to demobilizing the FEB and bringing them back to Brazil.
So after roughly 9 months of fighting in Italy, what were the final losses for the Brazilian army?
Around 2,100 soldiers killed in action in Italy. That figure includes 22 pilots from the FAB as well.
And we shouldn't forget the earlier naval losses either.
Absolutely not. Over the whole war, 35 Brazilian ships were attacked, 23 sunk, and nearly 1,000 sailors lost their lives in the Atlantic, a significant toll across all branches.
So wrapping this up, it's really clear, isn't it? Brazil's role in World War II, especially in that Italian campaign, was, well, much bigger than often portrayed.
Definitely. Quite a journey from neutrality to being a key fighting force against the Axis, and they paid a real price for it too.
Yeah, the sacrifice was significant. What really sticks with me is how this, relatively small, initially quite inexperienced force made such a tangible difference in Italy.
They really did contribute to the liberation of a major part of Europe. Maybe not always the headline act, but a crucial supporting role in the Allied victory.
And I think for anyone listening, it just broadens that picture of World War II, doesn't it? Shows how truly global it was, with important contributions coming from places maybe we don't always think about first.
Exactly, which kind of leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If Brazil played this significant, sometimes overlooked role, what other nations, maybe ones we consider lesser known in the context of these huge conflicts, also played surprising parts in shaping history?
That's a great thought to end on. It reminds us that history is often way more complex, more interconnected than the simple version we sometimes get told.